Before I tell you what I did, I want you to stay with me. Because this isn't just my story. If you've ever been the one your family forgot about, the one who showed up anyway, then you already know how this feels. My name is Daniel. I'm 32 years old. I work as a paramedic in Columbus, Ohio, and for most of my life, I believed that doing the right thing was enough. That if you kept showing up, kept being steady, kept loving people who didn't always love you back the same way, it would eventually mean something. I was wrong about that. Or maybe I was right, just not in the way I expected. Let me start where it actually started. Not the night everything fell apart, but 12 years before that, when my father sat me down at the kitchen table and told me I needed to be more like my brother. My brother's name is Marcus. He's 4 years older than me, and from the time we were kids, he had a kind of shine to him that I never had. He was loud in a way that made rooms turn toward him. He told jokes that made my father laugh until his eyes watered. He got average grades, but talked about them like they were extraordinary, and somehow everyone believed him. I got better grades, stayed quieter, cleaned up after dinner without being asked, and was invisible. My father didn't dislike me. I want to be clear about that. He just had a limited amount of attention, and Marcus had learned early how to take most of it. My mother was different. She noticed me, she asked questions, she remembered things. She was the one who came to my high school graduation with a camera. She was the one who called every Sunday after I moved out, not to fill silence, but because she genuinely wanted to know how my week had gone. She was the one I was driving to reach 9 months ago, on a Tuesday night in October, when the rain was coming down so hard I couldn't see the lane markers on I-70. I'd gotten a voicemail at 9:47 p.m. It wasn't from my mother. It was from a number I didn't recognize, a 614 area code, and when I played it back, it took me a moment to understand what I was hearing. It was a woman's voice, older, shaky. She said she was a neighbor. She said she'd found my mother sitting on the front step of Marcus's house with a garbage bag next to her and no coat on. She said my mother had given her my number from memory and asked her to call. She said my mother kept saying she didn't want to make trouble. I pulled over. I sat in a gas station parking lot in the rain and played that voicemail 4 times. Then I called the neighbor back, and she told me my mother had been moved inside to sit in her car because it was warmer, and that she didn't know what had happened, only that Marcus and his wife had put her outside and told her she wasn't welcome in the house anymore. My mother had been living with Marcus and his wife Carla for 8 months. She had moved in after her knee surgery, when she couldn't manage the stairs in her apartment alone. I want to say that clearly, I had offered to take time off work and help her, but Marcus had insisted. He said it made more sense. He said he had the space, the spare room, the flexible schedule. He said it with the confidence of someone who expected to be thanked for it, and my mother, who had spent 68 years trying not to be a burden, had agreed. I drove 90 miles through that rain. It took me an hour and 40 minutes because I was going faster than I should have been, and the whole time my brain kept running through possibilities and rejecting them. There had to be an explanation. There had been a fight, a misunderstanding, something that would resolve itself by the time I arrived. Marcus had a temper, but he wasn't. I kept telling myself he wasn't capable of this. When I turned onto his street, I saw the neighbor's car parked at the curb with the interior light on. I pulled up behind her and got out into the rain, and she rolled down her window and pointed to the back seat. My mother was sitting there in a cardigan and slippers, holding a styrofoam cup of something warm that the neighbor had made for her, and when she saw me, she looked relieved and ashamed in equal measure, which is one of the hardest combinations of expressions I've ever seen on a person's face. I opened the door and crouched down beside her, and I said, "Mom." That's all I said. And she said, "I'm sorry to drag you all the way out here, Daniel." She apologized to me. She had been put outside her son's house in the rain in her slippers, and she apologized for the inconvenience of my drive. I helped her into my car and thanked the neighbor, whose name was Beverly, and I gave Beverly my number and told her she had done the right thing. Then I turned the heat up as high as it would go and looked at my mother and asked her what happened. She didn't answer right away. She held the styrofoam cup in both hands and looked straight ahead and said, "It was complicated." I said, "Okay, take your time." She said Marcus and Carla had been going through a hard time. She said they'd had some disagreements. She said she thought maybe she'd overstayed her welcome and it was probably better if she found her own place again. I said, Mom, did they ask you to leave or did they make you leave? She didn't answer that question. I drove her to my apartment and set her up in my room and made up the couch for myself. She was limping more than I remembered, the knee that had been operated on 8 months ago. When I asked her about it, she said the physical therapy had been going fine. When I looked at her slippers, I noticed the heel of the left one was worn completely through. I didn't sleep that night. I sat on my couch with my phone and started making calls to my mother's doctors, her insurance, her former landlord. I went through my own memory of the past 8 months and started cataloging things that hadn't seemed significant at the time. The Sunday calls had gotten shorter. Then they'd gotten less frequent. Then they'd started coming from Marcus's home phone instead of her cell, which I'd thought was just because she found the buttons easier to press. I thought about the last time I'd visited in person, 5 months ago, and how Carla had been pleasant but watchful, and how my mother had seemed quieter than usual, how she'd walked me to the door and held my hand a beat longer than normal before I left. I thought about the envelope. 3 weeks before that rainy Tuesday, I'd gotten a piece of mail forwarded to me that was addressed to my mother at Marcus's address. It was from her bank. I'd called her to let her know it had come to me by mistake, and she'd said it was nothing important, and I'd believed her and put it on my kitchen counter and mostly forgotten about it. I found that envelope at 2 a.m. and opened it. It was a statement, my mother's savings account. The balance was $46. I sat with that number for a long time. Then I went to my desk and found every piece of paper I'd received or kept in the past year that related to my mother in any way. A birthday card, a forwarded piece of mail, a printed email chain, and I spread it all out on the floor. Her account had held just over $94,000 8 months ago. I knew this because she had told me when Marcus suggested she move in, laughing a little, saying, at least I have enough set aside that I'm not totally useless. She had been proud of that number. It had taken her 40 years to save it. 40 years to save $94,000. 8 months to reach $46. I did not sleep. In the morning, I called in a personal day from work. I sat at my kitchen table with a cup of coffee that I never drank and waited for my mother to wake up. When she came out of the bedroom, still in her cardigan, moving carefully on her bad knee, I asked her to sit down. I told her what I had found. I put the bank statement on the table between us, and I didn't say anything else. She looked at it for a long time. Then she said, Marcus had some difficulties at work. He said it was temporary. He said he was going to pay it back. I asked her if she'd agreed to the withdrawals. She said he had asked her to sign some forms. She said she hadn't read them carefully. She said she trusted him. I asked her if Carla had been present when she signed. My mother said yes. She said Carla had been the one who brought the forms. I asked my mother if Marcus had ever hurt her, physically. She looked at the window. She said, he has a bad temper. He's always had a bad temper. You know how he is. I said, Mom, I need you to answer the question I asked. She said he had grabbed her arm once when she tried to take her purse before signing one of the forms. She showed me the inside of her forearm. There was a fading bruise there, green-yellow at the edges, the shape of a thumb and 2 fingers. I took a photograph of it. Then I called a lawyer. Her name was Patricia Osei, and she had been recommended to me by a colleague at work who had gone through something similar with an elderly parent. I reached her office at 9 a.m. and explained the situation in as much detail as I could, and by 10:30 I was sitting across from her with my mother beside me, and the bank statement and the photograph of the bruise on the table. Patricia was methodical and quiet, and she made my mother feel safe in a way that I was grateful for. She explained what elder financial abuse meant under Ohio law. She explained that the forms my mother had signed, if signed under coercion or without full understanding, might not hold up. She said the first step was documentation, and the second step was getting protective orders, and the third step was the police. My mother flinched at the word police. Patricia said, I understand this is your son we're talking about. I want you to know that what you decide to do is your choice. But I want you to understand what has happened to you and what your options are. My mother looked at her hands on the table. She said, I don't want to make trouble. I said, Mom, he already made the trouble. We're just dealing with it now. She didn't say anything for a moment. Then she said, okay. Over the next 3 weeks, I learned more about the logistics of financial exploitation than I ever expected to. Patricia filed for an emergency protective order, which was granted within 48 hours. We went to the Columbus Division of Police and filed a formal report. A detective named Harris was assigned to the case, and he was the kind of person who asked clear questions and wrote down everything and didn't make my mother feel foolish for having trusted her son. Marcus called me twice during that period. The first time, I didn't answer. The second time, I did. He said he didn't know what kind of story my mother had been telling me, but that she had agreed to everything voluntarily, and I needed to stay out of family business. I said, "You put her outside in the rain in her slippers." I asked him if he thought that was family business. He said she'd been ungrateful. He said she'd been difficult to live with. He said Carla had done everything for her and gotten no appreciation. I said, "You took $94,000 from a 68-year-old woman recovering from knee surgery." And then I said, "We have documentation." And then I hung up. Detective Harris moved quickly once the bank records were subpoenaed. What came back was worse than I'd imagined. Marcus had forged 2 of the 4 authorization forms. Patricia had suspected this, which is why she had asked my mother to write out her full signature 3 times during their first meeting. So there was a clean comparison sample. Carla had opened a joint account using my mother's information without her knowledge. Over the course of 7 months, $91,400 had moved from my mother's savings into that account, and from there into expenses that had nothing to do with my mother's care. A boat payment, a vacation to Cancun, credit card debt from the year before, the knee surgery follow-up appointments that had been scheduled. My mother had missed the last 3, not because she didn't want to go, because no one had taken her. When the case went to the prosecutor's office, the charges filed were elder financial abuse, theft, forgery, and domestic violence for the bruise. Ohio takes that seriously even when the physical contact is brief. Marcus and Carla were arrested on a Thursday morning. I know this because Detective Harris called me at 8:14 a.m. to tell me. I was in the parking lot of my apartment building, and I sat down on the curb and I pressed my hand to my face for a minute and breathed. My mother was in the kitchen making oatmeal. I went inside and told her. She turned off the burner and stood at the stove with her back to me for a moment. Then she said, "What happens to them now?" I told her what Patricia had explained. The charges, the timeline, what the process looked like. I told her it was out of our hands now, in the best possible way. She turned around. Her eyes were wet. She said, "I'm sorry it took me so long to see it." I said, "You don't have to apologize." She said, "I do. I know how I treated you when you were growing up. I know whose side I always took. I thought I was keeping the peace. I didn't understand what I was teaching him. I didn't have an answer for that was both honest and kind. So I just stood there." And she crossed the kitchen and put her arms around me. And we stood there for a while in the morning light with the oatmeal cooling on the stove. Here's what I want to say for anyone who is watching this and recognizing something in it. I know what it is to be the one who is overlooked. I know what it is to do the right thing in a family where doing the right thing doesn't get noticed. I spent most of my life wondering if I was wrong about what I thought mattered. If the steady, quiet, unglamorous work of showing up was actually worth less than the louder performances happening around me. The answer eventually was no. It was not worth less. It just took longer to be seen. My mother's knee has been properly treated now. She's back in her own apartment on 1 floor with a grab bar I installed in the bathroom and a physical therapist who comes twice a week. She calls me on Sundays. The calls are longer than they used to be. Marcus's case went to trial 2 months ago. He was convicted on all charges. Sentencing is scheduled for next month. I won't speculate about what the judge will decide. I'll just say that the documentation was thorough and the prosecutor was good at her job. I did not enjoy any of it. I want to be clear about that too. There was no satisfaction in watching my brother be led out of a courtroom. There was only something quiet and heavy, like finishing a task you never wanted to have to do. But I would do it again. Every mile of that drive in the rain, every sleepless night at my kitchen table, every phone call, every form, every hour in a waiting room, because the woman sitting in the back seat of Beverly's car in her slippers, apologizing for taking up space, deserved someone who would not leave her there. I am not a perfect son. I have my own failures, my own distances, my own years where I pulled back because it was easier. But I showed up when it mattered. That is the thing I will hold on to. If you have someone in your life who has been taken from, who has been silenced, who has been made to feel like a burden, please check in on them. Ask the specific questions. Look at the bank statements. Notice the bruises, even the fading ones. And if you are that person, If you are sitting somewhere right now feeling like you don't want to make trouble, I want you to hear this. You are not the trouble. You never were.